They thought it was just a smile, until experts zoomed in on the photo and discovered a dark secret. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Heritage Restorations, a small studio tucked between a coffee shop and a law office on Meeting Street in Charleston, South Carolina. Maya Bennett adjusted her magnifying lamp and reached for the next item in the day's intake pile. A manila envelope marked fragile family heirloom in neat, careful handwriting. She slid out a photograph, and her breath caught. The image was mounted on thick cardboard, its edges softened by more than a century of handling. Someone had protected it well. The sepia tones were still rich, the details surprisingly clear for 1903. Maya had restored hundreds of old photographs in her 15 years as a professional conservator, but something about this one made her pause, even before she read the attached note. The photograph showed a black family posed in a professional studio. She recognized the painted pastoral backdrop, popular at the time, and the formal arrangement typical of the era. A father stood to the left, his hand resting on an ornate wooden chair. 4 children, ranging from perhaps 3 to 12 years old, sat and stood in descending height, dressed in their Sunday finest, starched collars, polished leather shoes, hair neatly combed and braided, and in the center, seated in the ornate chair with her hands folded gently in her lap, was the mother. Maya leaned closer. Immediately, she saw what made the photograph unusual. While every other family member wore the rigid, solemn expression demanded by early photography, faces frozen to avoid blurring during long exposure times, the woman in the center was smiling. Not grinning, but unmistakably smiling. Soft, serene, deliberate. Her eyes held a warmth that seemed to reach across more than a century. People simply didn't smile in photographs from this period. Exposure could take 30 seconds or longer, and even the slightest movement ruined the image. Beyond that, Victorian social customs demanded seriousness, especially for black families in the Jim Crow South, where photographs were a statement of dignity, resilience, and proof of humanity in a country denying it. But this woman smiled. Maya set down her magnifying glass and unfolded the note. "Dear Miss Bennett, this photograph has been in our family since 1903. My great-great-grandmother is the woman seated in the center. We've always treasured it, but it is damaged, and we'd like it restored and digitized. There's something special about this photo. Our grandmother used to say, 'That picture holds more than it shows.' Maybe you'll see what she meant. Respectfully, Dorothy Harris." That smile no longer felt like an accident. It felt like a message. Instead of a routine restoration, Maya made a decision. She would scan the photograph at the highest resolution possible. Perhaps, somewhere within the grain of the emulsion, she would find what Dorothy's grandmother hinted at. What she didn't know was that this decision would lead her into a mystery more than a century old. She arrived early the next morning, coffee in hand, the image lingering in her mind like a splinter. That anachronistic smile had become a question she couldn't ignore. Maya set up her high-end Hasselblad scanner, capable of capturing microscopic detail far beyond typical restoration needs. For this photograph, she wanted everything. The scan took nearly an hour at 12,000 dpi. While the machine worked, she researched Charleston Photography Studios, operating in 1903. Despite segregation, several black-owned studios thrived, documenting weddings, funerals, church gatherings, and, rarely, family portraits like this one. Photographs such as these were acts of pride and resistance. When the scanner finally beeped, Maya transferred the massive file to her monitor and opened it. The clarity was breathtaking. She zoomed in, detail by detail, the father's calloused fingers gripping the chair, each braid in the eldest daughter's hair, the youngest child's solemn, intense gaze. Then she went to the mother. Her heart quickened. At this resolution, she could see every eyelash, the fine texture of the woman's skin, the weave of her dark Sunday dress, and the smile, controlled, deliberate, Holding such an expression through a long exposure would have been difficult, perhaps painful, especially if she had been ill. Then Maya noticed something else. The woman's hands. The right hand was partially hidden beneath the left, fingers positioned with intentional care. She wasn't simply resting them, she was concealing something. With gentle adjustments to brightness and contrast, the shadows lifted. There it was. A small cylindrical object, perhaps 3 inches long, with what appeared to be a decorative metal end, catching the faint glint of the studio's gas lamps. Something she'd wanted remembered, something she had smiled for. What was it? And why had the woman positioned her hand so carefully to both reveal and conceal it at the same time? Maya sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This wasn't just an unusual smile. This was a photograph with layers, intentional composition, secrets hidden in plain sight for more than a century, waiting for technology advanced enough to notice. She needed answers. Who was this woman? What was she holding? And why, in a time when photographs demanded solemn dignity, had she chosen to smile? Maya opened the intake form and found the client's number. It was early, but someone who protected an image for 4 generations would want to know what she had discovered. She dialed. Dorothy Harris answered on the second ring. "Hello, Ms. Bennett." "Good morning, Miss Harris. This is Maya from Heritage Restorations. I'm calling about the photograph you brought in yesterday." Dorothy's voice lifted with concern. "Yes, is everything all right? No damage?" "It's perfectly safe," Maya assured her, eyes drifting to the monitor where the enigmatic smile gleamed back. "But I found something unusual. Would you be able to come by? I'd like to show you what I've discovered." Silence, then a trembling breath. "You found something?" "Yes, and I think it's best discussed in person. I can be there in an hour." Dorothy arrived exactly 60 minutes later, cardigan pressed, portfolio clasped tight, eyes drawn instantly to the portrait on Maya's desk. She approached it like one approaches a grave or a relic. Slow, reverent, familiar. "That's her," Dorothy murmured, voice filled with both love and ache. "My great-great-grandmother, Ruth Thompson. The picture was taken May 1903. Anderson Photography, King Street. The studio's gone now." "What can you tell me about her?" Maya asked. Dorothy exhaled, eyes warming with memory she did not personally own, yet carried. "She died 6 weeks later, tuberculosis. She was only 32. She left 4 children, the oldest 12, the youngest 3. She pointed gently to each figure. "My great-grandmother is that girl standing behind the chair." A cold shiver ran through Maya. Ruth knew she was dying when she sat for this photograph. She knew this would be the only image her children would have. "The family saved for almost a year to afford it," Dorothy continued softly. "1 portrait, that's all they ever had. After she passed, Samuel, her husband, never remarried. He kept the photograph on the mantel until he died in 1941. Maya swallowed. "And the smile?" she asked quietly. Dorothy nodded slowly, eyes wet. "She insisted on it," she whispered. "The photographer tried to dissuade her, said holding a smile would blur the exposure. She was weak, barely able to sit. But she told him, 'My children will look at this picture for the rest of their lives. I want them to see me happy.'" Maya turned to the monitor. "I found something else." She zoomed in, Ruth's hands magnified until every wrinkle, thread and fold came into clarity. There's something in her right hand, hidden, but not completely, as if she meant for someone, someday, to see it. Dorothy leaned forward, breath catching. Maya enhanced the contrast, and the cylindrical object emerged. "Oh my God," Dorothy whispered. She reached into her portfolio with trembling fingers, revealing letters, programs, scraps of lineage, and wrapped in thin tissue, the object itself, a silver needle case. 3 inches long, engraved with roses and vines, tarnished dark only where time had touched it. The same shape, the same size, the same artifact Ruth had held in her final portrait. This, Dorothy breathed, belonged to Ruth. It was passed through the women in our family, generation to generation. She never went anywhere without it. It was her treasure. Maya turned it gently in her hand. Craftsmanship exquisite, intimate, a lifetime of work worn into its surface. She was a seamstress? Maya asked. Dorothy nodded, pride now stronger than grief. More than a seamstress, she said. A miracle with a needle. Wealthy white families secretly hired her to make gowns they claimed came from New York or Paris. Her stitches were so fine, so even, you couldn't tell her work from the most expensive ateliers in the world. Maya and Dorothy stared at the last sentence, the unfinished ink bleeding faintly into the paper, a century-old echo of urgency. The numbers will show the way. Maya exhaled slowly. Numbers, she repeated, not words. She didn't leave a written key. She hid a numerical one. Dorothy turned again to the photograph on the screen. Ruth seated in the center, children gathered close, her smile small but unmistakably intentional. Not posed. Directed. Maya zoomed in. The stitching of the children's cuffs, the hemline of Ruth's dress, buttons, pleats, folds of fabric, details easy to overlook. But then, the smiles. Not everyone in the photograph was smiling. Only Ruth. And the eldest daughter. Barely. Almost concealed. Maya's mind clicked. What if she's smiling at something? Maya whispered, zooming further. Not just smiling for the photograph. She traced the line of Ruth's gaze, her eyes just barely off-center, not looking into the camera, but toward her own lap. More specifically, toward her right hand, resting atop the eldest son's shoulder. Dorothy leaned closer, holding her breath. Zoom in on her sleeve, she said. Maya did. The fabric sleeve, dark cotton, ordinary at first glance, but under magnification, a pattern emerged. Tiny stitch clusters, barely perceptible, like flecks of dust. But they weren't random. They repeated in groups, 5, 3, 2, a sequence. Dorothy's pulse quickened. Numbers. She did sew them into the clothes. Maya worked methodically, adjusting exposure, contrast, spectral light. Under enhancement, the subtle stitches brightened. Numbers formed like constellations across the fabric. 5, 3, 2, 8, 1, 5, 3, 2. Coordinates? Dorothy murmured. No, Maya said quietly. Not location. Something smaller, closer. Something the family could keep with them. Something portable. She screenshotted the pattern and cross-referenced the controls on her desk. Measurement software, image mapping, thread density calculations. Slowly, a grid formed, not random numbers, counting marks, stitch counts, thread intervals, a code. Maya scribbled notes quickly. 5, collar edge, 3, button row, 2, hidden seam, 8, skirt fold, 1, neckline 5, hem 3, left cuff, 2, right cuff. Dorothy stared speechless. It's a map, Maya said. A pattern map. She hid pieces of something inside the clothing they wore that day. Maybe scraps, maybe messages, maybe a whole quilt broken apart. She looked up slowly. They weren't just dressed for a portrait. They were dressed in instructions. Dorothy pressed a hand to her mouth. And when the clothes were sold, she whispered, the pieces went with them. Maya nodded grimly, but one piece survived. She held up the indigo square between its protective sheets, which means others might still exist, scattered, sold, handed down, lost in trunks and attics across generations. Dorothy's eyes filled with something electric, grief, awe, and a flicker of hope. So Ruth didn't fail, she breathed. Her message didn't die. We found one piece. We can find more. Maya closed the letters gently. We start with the children, she said. "We track where each garment might have gone. Descendants, estate records, auctions, church donations, anything. If we find another fabric square, the code might continue." She turned back to the photograph, to Ruth's soft, defiant smile. "A century later," Maya whispered. "She's still guiding them." The final words trailed off into nothing. Maya read the last line again, her heart pounding. "Look where I smile. The numbers will show the way." She turned to the monitor, studying Ruth's face with new intensity. The smile wasn't just unusual, it was a deliberate signal, a marker pointing to something hidden in the photograph itself. "Miss Parris," Maya said slowly, her mind working through the puzzle, "do you still have any of the children's clothing from this photograph? Anything that was actually worn that day?" Dorothy shook her head sadly. "No, nothing survived. The family was too poor to keep clothes as keepsakes or memorabilia. Everything was worn until it fell apart, then the fabric was cut up and reused for quilts, rags, anything that was needed. Nothing from that day exists anymore except this photograph." Maya felt a flicker of disappointment, then a revelation hit her with force. Wait, Ruth wrote that she sewed the answer into their clothes. What if the secret isn't in the clothes themselves, but in how they appear in the photograph? What if she stitched something meant to be captured forever in the image? She zoomed in on each child, examining clothing in maximum resolution. She began with Clara, the oldest. The dress was plain, but the collar, starched white cotton, held something nearly invisible, a tiny embroidered digit, matching the fabric so closely it would have been impossible to see in 1903. But here on a modern screen, magnified and sharpened, it appeared 4. "There's embroidery on Clara's collar," Maya whispered. "A number, 4. Dorothy leaned closer, trembling. "What does it mean?" Maya zoomed to the next child, a boy, maybe 9. On his collar, nearly invisible, 7. The next child, a little girl in a mended dress, 2. The youngest, in a sailor suit, 9. 4, 7, 2, 9, Maya murmured, writing them down. She embroidered numbers into each garment, tiny and hidden, so only someone with modern tools could ever find them. Dorothy stared at the digits. "What does it mean? An address? A date?" Maya thought. Ruth was a seamstress. Measurements, patterns, numbers were her language. What if they're measurements? In sewing, everything is inches, bust, waist, length, seams. 47 and 29 could be bust and waist. She paused. Or maybe the numbers aren't separate. Maybe we read them in pairs, or even combined differently. Dorothy searched her phone. The letter mentioned the Rutland Commission. Maybe Catherine Rutland, the bride? Let me check. They worked in silence, Maya still analyzing the image, while Dorothy sifted through digitized papers from 1903 Charleston. "I found something," Dorothy said suddenly. "A society page, August 1903. Catherine Rutland married James Thornton. She wore an ivory silk gown, though the seamstress was unnamed." Maya's pulse quickened. So Ruth completed the commission before she died. And these numbers, they must relate to that wedding trousseau. She stared again at the photograph, Ruth's impossible smile, the needle case in her hands. Dr. Parks once told me unfinished work was ordered destroyed. But if Ruth finished the gown, she might have hidden it and left a code so her children could claim it later. But where would she hide something so valuable? Dorothy asked. Maya's eyes returned to the studio chair Ruth sat on. Detailed, ornate, solid. "She's sitting in the hiding place," Maya whispered. "Somewhere public, somewhere safe. The photograph studio. Props wouldn't vanish. Just move." Dorothy inhaled sharply. "The studio closed in 1928. What happened to its furniture?" Maya called Dr. Parks at the Historical Society. 2 hours later, he rang back. When Anderson Photography closed, the studio props were sold. Many pieces, including carved chairs, were bought by Mother Emanuel Church for their community hall. Mother Emanuel, Ruth's own church, still standing. 3 days later, with permission to search the basement archives, Maya and Dorothy descended into storage. And there it was, the ornate wooden chair, the same as in the photograph. The seat lifted open. Inside, wrapped in muslin untouched by time, was a bundle. They unwrapped it slowly. Silk glowed beneath the cloth. A complete wedding trousseau, an ivory gown, evening wear, day dresses, undergarments, all marked with tiny initials, CR inside the bodice, a note, for my children, measurements 472942, completed May 1903, Ruth Thompson. Seamstress. Dorothy wept, clutching the gown, a mother's final gift, hidden for 121 years, protected by a photograph, guarded by a smile that waited for someone to understand. Love sewn into silk, history waiting in silence, a secret finally uncovered.